driven emotion. Thanks, Dolly. We are an emotional support helpline. We started in August of 2023. We provide free, confidential, non-judgmental emotional support to anyone feeling stressed, depressed, or suicidal. We have thoroughly trained volunteers. We have 22 volunteers and growing as of now. And I'm sure you will all appreciate the kind of work that we do, because we all have at some point felt the need to speak and be really heard and understood. So currently we operate from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on all days, all 7 days. And we will put the details of the helpline in the chat, and it's also here on our background. So you can share and, let this message reach as many people as possible. So again, before I introduce the speaker, again, just checking if my voice is okay or audible, just making sure. Yes? Great. Awesome. Thank you. So before I introduce the speaker of the day, and I'm so excited to do that, but I would like to get some housekeeping out of the way. We will be recording the session. So if you miss it, you will be able to see it on our YouTube page. We would like it to be as interactive as possible. Do put in your questions in the chat or raise your hand, and we will take the question at an appropriate time. But if it can wait till the end, we will have a Q&A time towards the end as well, right? Towards the end, we will also have a very short feedback form so that we know how this is going for you and what you would really like to hear from us going forward. Great. So with all of that out of the way, it's time to introduce Kiran Bhatia, the speaker of the day. There she is. Good morning, Kiran.
Morning.
Thank you so much, Kiran, for being here with us today.
It's a pleasure.
Great. So she's just the person for us today to speak about this. So, and you'll see why when I tell you her profile. So she's a development professional with over 40 years of international experience. She has worked extensively on gender equality and social inclusion, women's and children's rights, protection from violence, harmful practices with voluntary organizations, governments, international agencies. You see how I'm getting breathless just reading this out. That's how much work she has done in this space. And to go with that, she has, also studied this work. So she has done masters in social work, specializing in gender and development. She provides expertise to several agencies in developing their national, regional, and global gender equality policies and programs. I think we're very, very fortunate that, somebody who's working at that level is here to explain the ABCs literally of gender to us. She has been the regional gender advisor for UNICEF in South Asia and UNFPA for the Asia Pacific region. She provided technical support for addressing gender inequality issues and for prevention and support services to women and girls who faced violence. Post her retirement from UN, apart from helping us understand more about all of this, she also works in Cambodia, Nepal, Laos, and India, working with governments to build capacity to address gender and social exclusion. She supports NGOs in response in their enhanced COVID response to women and children in gender analysis. She is based out of Bangalore, and she serves on the advisory board for several NGOs, suicide prevention and women survivors of violence, and as an international gender specialist to institutions. So I don't think we need any more proof that she's just the person to help us understand this topic today. Thank you again, Kiran, for being here. Just a quick introduction to the topic itself. It is quite, when we were discussing about this topic, it's quite confusing for many of us, what is all of this really, and how do we speak about it? How do we really be more inclusive? How do we understand gender? So today we gather to explore the concept of gender itself. I think the way we understand it may not really be it, and Kiran will show us why. Is it really binary? You know, what is the impact that it has on the people in our society? Traditional notion that we have of, you know, gender as male or female, does it really, you know, cover the full spectrum of human experience? And I'm sure many of us may be coming, you know, more and more in touch with and in interaction with people who do not feel strictly male or strictly female. So let's demystify this gender binary. We hope to broaden our perspectives, which means we all need to have an open mind, right? Challenge our stereotypes and really make way for embracing this concept as well. And just to be very clear, our focus, and you know the kind of work that Pukar also does, our focus is really to foster a more inclusive environment. How can we, while we want to understand what it is these terms mean and what they go through, our focus really is to maintain or create an inclusive environment where we are able to be more emotionally supportive, regardless of what gender, what identity, and they feel valued and supported, right? So, Kiran, given this confusion and misunderstanding that all of us have around this topic, I would really request you to start from ABCs of gender and over to you from here.
Thank you so much, Anu, and thank you to Pokar colleagues. Thank you to all of you who are attending. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored that Pokar invited me to speak to all of you. I have a very strong bias about any group that tries to work on suicide prevention, who offers a helpline. It's one of the first things I did when I was 21 years old. We founded Sanjeevani in 1975. Give you an idea how old I am, in Delhi. It was the first center in India to actually try and arrange what was seen as a Western concept to help people who are suicidal, depressed. And we had no time to look back. I was founder director for 10 years, and I learned the ABC on my feet about responding, listening, empathy, befriending, dealing with people who are suicidal, but also the other gamut. As Anu said, these are not watertight compartments, and people who are disturbed could have problems with their sexuality, they could have interpersonal problems, there could be cases of violence. So it's really important to begin with ourselves and to understand our own identity, to understand our own biases. So I hope I'm able to address some of that today. Thank you so much again. I just want to let you know that I've recently had a throat surgery. So if my voice sounds a bit weird, I apologize for that. And I may have to take small breaks because I'm still going through therapy. But as you can see, it doesn't stop me from continuing my work. And thank you for your tolerance with my voice. So now over to gender. That's, a very big word. If you look at the Oxford Dictionary, gender is actually a term that is referred to as a grammatical term. It looks at men and women as a definition. But thanks to the decades of work done by the women's movement, when women started fighting for their rights, going back over 150 years, the term gender emerged from the work done on women and development. I was fortunate to be involved in every phase of this development. Earlier, women were seen as a category, like you have the poor or you have the handicapped. Even though women were 50% of the population, they were seen as a category that needed help. And so services were targeted at women as a separate, unfortunate category. It took almost 60, 70 years to bring the issue of rights and to recognize that women have equal rights to men and that it is something else, not their biology, that has created this huge inequality, both structural and interpersonal, where women are in every facet of life in a lower position. And your data will tell you that it took many, many initiatives and advocacy to have global laws and global norms which dictated that countries and governments have to have policies and laws which address the inequality between men and women. The outcome of this process taught many people who had never thought about it that the difference between men and women is not biological. Very often, when I do training, I say gender, they say women. I say gender, they say sex. But gender is not just about the biological difference. Born with a certain biological reality, it could be the male anatomy, it could be the female anatomy, and it could be a third, what is known now as a third gender. And fortunately,
Kiran, if I may just interrupt you just a little bit here. I know you had this really very informative,
yeah, I'll come
picture
to
that would help.
I'll come in a minute. Let me first finish clarifying
Sure,
gender.
sure.
Give me 2 minutes. Thank you for reminding me. So the biological difference is a given to us when we are born. The rest of what we become is shaped completely by the society we live in, the family we grow up in, the religion, the culture, the community, plus our experiences. So, if all of you stop for a minute and reflect on your childhood, reflect and ask yourself, who am I? What's my identity? As a man or a woman, you'll find that your identity is shaped very deeply by what you were taught when you were a child, some of which you had no choice, by the scripts that you learn through your life experience, and that creates the identity we have of ourselves as men and women or a third gender. So the problem was that people did not recognize the social construction of gender. It took a long time, and it's still taking time for people to recognize that gender relations and gender inequality is not biological. It is socially constructed. It has been created by sets of men and women, and it can be recreated. So, the good news for all of us is that it's dynamic and it's changeable. So, initially, when we started training 20 years ago, we used to say biology is given, but our social relations can change. But today, due to scientific advancement, due to the rights battle by those who are in the third gender, we can argue that both the biology and the social relations can be transformed. So I just wanted to say that gender is a very dynamic, ever changing process. What all of us experience, our grandmothers had in terms of clothing, education, mobility, choices about marriage and children. Women today have a very different situation, but it varies enormously by your religion, by your caste, by your ethnicity, by your education, by your location, and so many other factors, which is why we speak about gender and social inclusion. Can you all hear me clearly? Is that clear?
Yes, yes, Kiran, that is clear. And if I may just take a moment to,
Yes.
summarize what you just said so beautifully, and correct me if I'm wrong. What you're basically saying is, biologically, we may have been born with a certain sex, but
Yes,
gender that we generally associate with the sex is actually a completely different thing, which is a social construct.
absolutely. And also,
Beautiful,
our attitude towards others is so
beautiful.
deeply shaped by what the biases that we have, and we'll talk about biases in a
Yes.
minute. But I think we have to be technically clear about terminology. You know, today terminology is rapidly changing. It's hard to keep track and it's very confusing. We often joke that it's like an alphabet soup. So many new terms every day. People saying, "Ye kya hai? He, she, they. What do they mean by intersex? What do they mean by there's so many new words?" So let me show the figure now, please, and let me clarify some of this terminology. And please feel free to ask me for more clarifications. If we can have the figure, please. Dolly? So what I'm going to show you is how your sexuality, a human being's sexuality, is completely shaped not just by their anatomy. That's only one part of it. The human being's attitude to their sexuality is a very complex web of many factors. And I'd like to explain those factors to you. Many of these
Can you
terms,
see the picture?
no, not yet.
Anu, you can see?
Yes, it is visible.
I can
Kiran,
see it.
you're not able to see it?
I'm not able to see it, but it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
I have it in front of me on my computer. So if you all can see it, should I start
Yes.
explaining?
Yes, we are able to see it.
It's strange that I can't see it, but anyway. So this is a term called the gender bread person. It's just symbolic. It's created by a wonderful activist who got fed up of people calling him gay when he wasn't. And he tried to bring out the discriminations and the confusion of terminology. And he has this person here, as you can see, where he indicates first the sex. Now, the sex is either male, female anatomy, or a third anatomy. And you can see that it indicates the biological sex, the third column. I'm sorry, I can't see it, but I guess you can. I want to start with that.
If you give me a minute, maybe I can just share the other way. I can open the picture and share it.
It's okay, if you can see it, I'm fine.
It's
But
fine?
biological sex is female, male, and intersex. Does anyone know what intersex is? Anyone? So intersex is when your biology is not 100% male or female. So you might have some male organs, but you might have some female genes or some female hormones. Or there's so many different elements in our body that make us men or women as we are known. So the sexual anatomy is shaped by many levels. And in those who are intersex, they're not born with 100% male or female anatomy. That's what intersex means. But beyond the biology, so if I'm born as a woman, but I feel, as many of my cases I've counseled have said to me, Kiran, I feel like a man trapped in a woman's body. They completely feel like a man, but they're born with a woman's body. Or a man feels he's completely like a woman. His interests, he feels very feminine, while the other person feels very masculine. So that is to do with our identity. And the identity is very much what drives us on how we perceive ourselves, right? So imagine how horrible it is, how traumatic it is to feel like a woman but have a man's body. So this is where the identity drives sexual behavior and sexuality. And so understanding gender identity is very simple. It is when you identify yourself with another sex, which is different from the sex anatomy you were born with. Okay? Now let's look at orientation. So orientation is also very interesting. Sex orientation means that I look at my emotions, my romantic feelings, my sexual attraction to other people. And this orientation may not be the same as my anatomy. So I'm born as a man, but I feel attracted to both men and women. I feel oriented towards somebody it's not considered normal for me to be romantically attracted to. So sexual orientation is a combination of romantic feelings and also sex. It's not just sexual. It's how your mind feels happy if you're with a different kind of person. It's a strong attraction you have to a person who may not be considered the normal person you should be attracted to. So sexual orientation drives people to have sex with maybe the same sex or a transgender. It drives them to reject normal behavior, what is considered normal by society. It's normal for them because it gives them happiness. So sexual orientation is a very big factor in people having attraction and relationships with people from the same sex. the opposite sex, both. It could be any of them. So you see here, there's heterosexual, homosexual, and bisexual. Do you understand those terms? These are common terms. Heterosexual is what is the most common, men and women with each other. Homosexual is when men, being gay, are attracted only to men, and lesbian is women being attracted only to other women, and they have an abhorrence for the possibility of sex with men. And bisexual is when you're okay with either. And it's a growing reality now. Many young people, Gen Zs, are more open about the fact that they enjoy sex with men and with women. They enjoy relationships with both, regardless of what their own anatomy is. Being physically men or women, they are bisexual in their sexual practice. Is that clear? Any questions on that? It's okay.
Kiran, I have a question. I don't know, maybe you're coming to that now, but there are a lot of terms that we, speak about, transgender being one of them.
Yes, I'm coming
Where
to
does it fit here now? Is it part of the biological sex? Where does it fit?
So transgender is an umbrella term that we use where the gender identity and expression is different from cultural expectations. So it's both the elements you can see. It's the identity as well as your expression. Let me just come to expression, which is I have not covered. So expression is how, regardless of your physical anatomy, you like to present yourself, how you feel comfortable in your dress, in your makeup, in your hair, in your mannerisms, in the people you spend time with. So there you feel that this is how I feel more comfortable with my identity, right? So transgender, it's an umbrella term we use for people whose gender identity or expression is different from the cultural expectations based on what they were assigned by birth. So I'm born a man, right? I like to dress as a woman. I may be bisexual. Transgender people are not gay, not necessarily, but they like to dress and they associate themselves with the other gender. That's why you see a lot of transgender people who like to dress as women and change their pronoun to they or to she, and we'll come to the pronouns. Being transgender does not imply any specific sexual orientation, right? So if you see a transgender person, it doesn't mean they have to be gay or they're only attracted to men or to women. It's the fact that it's how they perceive themselves, their own identity. And many transgender people have surgeries. They get castrated, they take hormones to grow breasts because that's how they identify themselves. So it's a lot to do with their orientation and their identity. It's different from gay men and lesbian women, where the driver is sexual interaction with the same sex. Is that clear, Anu? Did I answer your question?
Yes, that's absolutely clear. This is so helpful because I think there's also usually a lot of confusion. Like I think we also had with confusing the two, gender and sexual orientation. And this is really helpful to clarify that. Thank you so much.
So remember, transgender people could be straight, they could be gay, they could be lesbian, they could be bisexual, they could be anything. But it's the way they perceive themselves, and therefore they often get rejected by society. So, what's the most common transgender form we have in India, which is culturally a big presence in our society? What are they called?
Is it the Hijras?
Yes.
Community? Yes.
And the Hijra community is rejected. Now, the Hijra community includes people who are intersex. What was intersex? I just explained it. People whose anatomy is not 100% male or female. So the Hijra community takes people who are rejected by society, and you could go on YouTube, there's so much information about transgender, and there's actually enormous development. We'll come to that later in the session. But I wanted to clarify. So if you look at the terminology on this table, gender identity, we've looked at women, men, and gender queer. Queer is another umbrella term, which includes bisexual, lesbian, gay, all of those. Androgynous means the feminine principle and the masculine principle. So I might be a man, but I'm very feminine. So I chose to, I'm still a man. I'm still heterosexual in my sexual behavior, but the androgyny within me, I have several feminine expressions, maybe in the clothes I wear, but I'm not transgender, right? You understand? And biological, I think, is very clear. Sexual orientation. So are you clear about these elements?
Yes,
I
yes.
hope it's not
Any,
confusing.
anyone who has questions can raise their hand or put the question in the chat box. But meanwhile, this is so complex, Kiran. And I'm just thinking here, somebody who's let's say, the norm, someone who is born female and identifies as female and expresses female, even they feel so misunderstood or struggle with society and expectations. I can't even imagine the kind of things that somebody who does not fall into the norm goes through. And I'd love for you to if possible speak about the challenges that they might be facing as well. And looks like we do have questions from Jayendra and Dolly, if you want to take that.
Up to you. I'm happy to take them now or later. It's your call. Whatever.
Jayendra and Dolly and Catherine, would it be all right if we take it at the end? We are in 30 minutes into the session and we'd really like to hear the challenges, because that's where our role really comes in, so we can understand better what they face and how we can be more emotionally supportive. Is that all right?
Sure.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Anu. So yeah, the challenges are phenomenal. The challenges start very early. It starts when the individual discovers that they're different. Once they discover they're different, whether it's the sexual orientation or it's the gender identity, it starts manifesting in everything in their life, in their interactions, in the people they want to spend time with, in the clothes they want to wear. And the social reaction at home, in schools, on the road, in public domain is always terrible. And I think I don't need to elaborate. You've watched movies, you've read newspaper reports, everywhere you read about the harassment, the humiliation, the trauma that people who are any of these categories, whether transgender or gay or lesbian or intersex, what they face. And so much research has been done. I mean, I could do a whole session just on the enormous challenges. So, psychologically, there is a huge sense of rejection. So, there's a big tussle of the identity you have of yourself and the complete rejection of that identity. So, that's a huge factor. It drives people to become violent, to take to drugs, to become sex workers, to be very suicidal, to need intensive counseling, to leave home, to run away. I mean, the panel of reaction people have at each stage of when it becomes impossible for them to cope is hard to describe here. And now in the UK and in other countries in the West in particular, there is a huge investment in starting special clinics for transgender children. Because what's happening is young adolescents are much more vocal. There's much more voice and there's much more choice in society now. Earlier in traditional society, this was repressed. So people to have a sense of belonging would repress their orientation, would repress their sexual attraction, and would continue to behave. And I'm sure you've heard of so many cases where men who are gay have married under pressure and continued gay relationships on the side. Same for women. I mean, homosexuality has been there from the time of the Greeks. The Kama Sutra talks about them, so it's not new. But our social openness to it has transformed in the last few decades. And now there are laws. So it has allowed people to come out more. But coming out more means they lead more of an help from people like you all because they face even more backlash. They face even more humiliation and violence. You've seen the violence in the streets towards transgender people. You've seen violence within homes towards women who express they're lesbian and refuse to marry, or men who say, I'll marry a man. And there's a huge social eruption in the family. They lose all their support mechanisms and they get completely isolated, which drives very traumatic and unhealthy social behavior by them. So, a lot of transgender people become sex workers. A lot of gay men and women in conservative societies lead two lives. Imagine the trauma they experience. One of the first cases I handled, which I can never forget, was a young homosexual. He was brilliant. He was the only son in a family of many daughters. And he tried everything within his competency to come to terms with it, to convince his family to find other friends. But in medical college, he was humiliated, isolated, and his family's father stopped talking to him. And finally, he jumped from the building at school. He couldn't cope. He committed suicide and he left a note. So the trauma can drive very unhealthy behavior. The other issue is that in the workspace, I'd like to talk briefly about that. In the workspace, now there is a directive to many organizations to be inclusive, right? You know about D&I work. Diversity inclusion is a very, what should I say, cutting edge demand on companies now. I work on that a lot at the moment. And they are told, look, you should hire some transgender, you should hire more women, you should engage Dalit women. So to be inclusive to those who are left behind includes transgender people. And many organizations have had to change their laws, change their policies, change their HR recruiting system. But people's minds have not changed. Our biases have not changed. And I'd like to talk about biases in a minute. So, the treatment within organizations is repressed aggression. It's microaggression, which is so unhealthy. You can read more about it. There's subtle rejection, there is under the table humiliation, abuse. So much abuse, physical, emotional, mental. And people in the workspace have left excellent jobs, even though they're brilliant at their job. Engineers, doctors, police officials. In the army, you must have heard what a challenge it's been for gay men to be accepted. But transgender people, please think about it for a minute. All those who have a different sexual orientation, there's nothing wrong with them. They may be brilliant in their profession. They may be wonderful human beings. Just because they have a different sexual orientation doesn't make them less or incapable or unable to do what you and I do. This is our bias. So if there's an engineer and he or she or they, as they like to be called, are able to perform, why should they not have equal opportunity? Why should we judge them based on their sexual orientation and the choices they make for their sexual interests? Please think about that. But it's such a powerful discriminatory tool that so many men and women suffer damage for the rest of their life in relationships, in work opportunities, in being safe on the streets, all of it. So it's very important to understand that counseling centers, but many will not reach out for help, right? What we have to work on is our own biases to accept in our communities, in our homes, in our neighborhoods, in our workspaces, in the public domain, is what we have to work on to be able to address this. I want to give a quick example. Sorry, Anu, if I may. I lived in Thailand for many years, and my bias was addressed there. Thailand has completely mainstream transgender people. They run buses, they run offices, they drive taxis, they're in the banks, they're in shops, they're everywhere. They dress the way they like, they hold very responsible jobs. And after a point, you realize that you were wrong. They're not different from anybody else. It's our bias. They're able to function very well. They're doctors, they're nurses, they're technicians, they're like any other person. There's nothing wrong with them. So this is what we haven't done enough on. And maybe I know if we have time, it might be a good point to show that little video we have.
Yes, Dolly, if you can just pull that up. You know, one point that you mentioned, Kiran, that really stuck out for me is, you know, actually even in India for ages, since ancient times, we have been very open to this. For some reason, contemporary society is not able to, you know, really understand this. Oh, we'll watch the video and then we'll
Please
speak.
watch the video.
Yes, let's do that. It's a 3-minute video, so bear with it.
Then we'll talk about bias after that.
હા જોશી સાહેબ શું કહો છો હા ઘણા ટાઈમથી વાટ જોઉં છું તમારા ફોનની
બાબુ દે ના રાજા
નહીં 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 હું તમારીથી વાત કરતો હતો જોવા વાટ જોઈ જોઈને થાકી ગયો.
हेलो लाओ दो ला दे ना
दे खुशी से दे दीदी क्या ऐसा कर रही है
हेलो हाँ
दे रोज नहीं आती
हाँ।
दे। दे दीदी।
हाँ 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 मैं आ रही हूँ कैसी है मम्मी हाय हाय अरे बेटा आ गई हटो चाचा दे बेटा
अरे दे दे इनको ही दे दे हम इसको रख के भी क्या करेंगे चल ला इधर।
हाय हाय जिसे भगवान ने नहीं अपनाया उसे इंसानों का ये समाज क्या अपनाएगा ला मेरा बच्चा दे दे इधर हाय हाय लल्ला मेरा बच्चा लल्ला
ये क्या तमाशा लगा रखा है अस्पताल है ये आवाज नीचे वरना तुम सबको बाहर निकाल दूंगी।
तू क्या निकालेगी हमें तुम लोगों ने अंदर ही कब आने दिया था है ना मेरे लल्ला
रुको कहाँ लेके जा रही हो बच्चे को?
ऐसी जगह जहाँ इससे हर रोज कोई ये ना पूछे कि लड़का है कि लड़की है ना लल्ला
मुझसे तो कोई नहीं पूछता। मैं बस सब इंस्पेक्टर रितिका हूँ।
जी वो बर्थ डिटेल्स का फॉर्म फिल करवाना था।
ये देखो अब इससे भी कोई नहीं पूछेगा।
अरे चलो रे चलो
How did you like that?
Too good.
Beautiful, so beautiful.
Too good, beautiful.
You saw the bias we have. And if you met the sub-inspector, you wouldn't know that she's transgender. But she had to fight a court case, not 1 but 3. The good news is that we'll come to that later, but we have solutions in the country now. We have solutions in organization. But let me talk about bias for a few minutes. Should I do that, Anu, now?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And that leads beautifully from what I was saying earlier. We were so open. What happened to us?
Well, I think we were not really open, Anu. We were open in accepting them as a separate group with a specific cultural role of coming to bless at weddings and births, but they were not part of our lives. We respected them in their occupation. Now what we're talking about is integration, complete inclusion. We are recognizing that their anatomy difference does not allow us to discriminate for them to be part of everything in our lives, part of society. So, we all are filled with biases towards gender in particular, not just towards people who are differently oriented. As I said, because of the way we are raised, there are many messages that we have which is part of our script. A lot of these biases are unconscious. You observed your parents, you observed in your community, you saw practices on how girls were treated in menstruation, how dowry was given for weddings, how men had to be circumcised, how there's an age of marriage, or how sex selection is practiced in your community because boys are favored, or girls study in low quality schools. I mean, these are subtle things that are happening, which is part of the normal life in your community, of which you had no choice, and which you were taught were the values of your family, the values of a good woman, or the values of a good man. It's only when we become adults and we start questioning for ourselves, for our own lives, then we realize that a lot of the messages we have about gender are bias, are filled with bias, religious bias, cultural bias, caste bias, ethnicity bias, age bias, language bias, and so much else. I've dealt with this in all my work constantly. The other day, my cook is Muslim, my driver is a high caste Hindu Brahmin. And he said to me, ये मुस्लिम लोग जो है ना, ये सब ऐसे ही है मैडम, ये जाति ऐसी है. And I had to spend an hour with him. I didn't let him go, I made him sit down. And I helped him see that his bias was totally uncalled for, that he'd inherited this bias from his caste. And you can't reject a whole community with a stereotype because he never questioned it. I've had men in training say, औरत जात बेकार है, कमजोर है, क्या करेंगे इनके साथ? These men will never hire women in their office, never. Because their whole experience is that women are to run kitchens, have babies, and do what I tell them. They can't imagine women being equal professional colleagues, taking decisions, having competency because of their bias. So a lot of our unconscious bias constantly shapes how we think, how we perceive, and how we react. And for agencies like Pokar, for those of us who are in the helping profession, this is a huge barrier because you won't even realize it's operating inside you. A person comes and speaks in a certain language, you've already got a filter saying, oh, this language person is from this family, they're like this. Or you find a person who comes from a particular ethnic group and you're already biased without realizing it. So getting aware of our own biases, our unconscious biases, is the only way for us to be more inclusive. And in this area of sexuality and gender diversity, the biases are harder to deal with because it's so deep, it's so linked to our values. अरे ये बड़ा अजीब बंदा है, ये तो gay है. How can it's that's disgusting? How is that possible? I've had intelligent senior people say this to me. Very intelligent people who have PhDs and very well renowned UN staff. So our bias has nothing to do with our education. It's a personal journey we have to go on to understand our own gender identity. And of course, there's no time now, but it also goes into how we deal with our own family, our own partners, our own children, what messages we give them. So that when we look at gender relations and patriarchy, which I don't have time to talk about, but you should do a separate session on patriarchy. Patriarchy is the root, which is systemic in our everyday life, in men and women's minds, in the systems that govern us, legal systems, marriage system, property rights system, education, all of them. And patriarchy does not help us to be inclusive at all. So we have to understand patriarchy when we understand gender, when we try and understand bias. The other kind of bias is the external bias that we end up belonging to, the bias in our workspace of men getting promoted and women not getting promoted, of transgender people not being hired, of posh not happening, not working. That's a bias, that's an institutional bias, could be in our family, in our community, in our workplace, in the public domain. So these are institutional biases which are much harder to deal with. So I don't know if that covers bias. I'm taking a lot of time, so maybe I should stop. Anu, how's it going?
No, it's going so well that I feel bad to interrupt. But what I'm hearing you say, Kiran, is really that, we may all be, really good people, really wanting to help and be supportive. And we are doing that in our own spaces in what is considered the norm. But in order to expand that a bit, what you're really saying is the biggest barrier in front of us is this bias, right? Because once that gets worked through, or at least we poke holes in it, then we already have our inherent self and our empathy and our, listening and all of those that we have to be inclusive and supportive. That's such a beautiful, revelation today for me that, that is the wall that we are really trying to get across.
Thank you, Anna, for summarizing it so well. But remember, this is a process.
Yes.
It's a very tough process. Like you tell your callers and your clients, you have to work on this. It's not going to happen overnight. The same way, this is a process of self-growth. And it's painful. You see behavior patterns in yourself which you don't like, which you never realized you had till somebody points it out to you, or you, in your journey of self-discovery, you find it.
Yeah.
And, I tell many people in the gender training, it's not like any other training where you can learn a software program or you can learn a skill. This is a process of rediscovering yourself, of rethinking the kind of human being you want to be as a man, a woman, or a third gender, and how you want to perceive and treat other human beings. So it's very huge actually, but it's very feasible, and I have seen many people change.
Yes.
So it's not that it's not possible. We have to remember gender is a dynamic process made by sets of people. It can be redesigned by other sets of people. It's up to
Beautiful.
us. It's up to us.
Yes.
It's not in our bodies, it's in our minds. And we can therefore change it like we change so many other things. So I wanted to say that the government of India, influenced by the global effort, has now got a Transgender Persons Protection Act 2019, and the rules were brought in 2020. There's amazing legal reform to support transgender. In many countries, same-sex marriages have been legalized, right? Many countries, after lots of fighting, lots of damage, finally they recognize that a person has a right to love who they want. You have hundreds of same-sex marriages who have beautiful children and beautiful families. Biology, technology has allowed us to select a sperm, to have an egg fertilized, and to have a child. So I have personally so many friends who are same-sex couples who have a lovely family. They're no different. So the possibilities due to technology development, due to the rights movement, due to legal reform is allowing everything to be possible. So transgender people today, as you saw from the film, have a right to be everywhere. A wonderful woman I know, you can Google her. She runs what are called the trans kitchens in Chennai. And what she did is she hired other trans people. They said, you don't need to beg on the streets. You don't need to go and clap at ceremonies. You can be an entrepreneur. Let's do it. Their trans kitchens are such a success that now the government of Tamil Nadu, even Karnataka, gives them the first choice to run government functions. At events, at weddings, they're so popular. The trans kitchens, they're called. They're an amazing success. So trans people have demonstrating their competency like anybody else. We have accepted people with a physical handicap, winning gold medals, running marathons, winning the gold in archery for India. Why can't we accept people who are sexually different to be competent and be equal?
Thank you, Kiran. So beautiful to see the change that has been happening. I think it's so important for us to also bring that out to, as we work on ourselves to make the change within ourselves, it's also important to see what is happening outside, and it is already happening. There is a lot of inclusion. Of course, there needs to be a lot more, and that's where these lovely people here and great work that you have been doing in this space is going to help. So we have about 8 minutes now, and I'd really like to open the floor for questions. I know, Jayendra, you had one earlier, and Catherine and Dolly as well. And if we have more, depending on the time that we have. So, Jayendra, would you like to go first?
Actually, maybe my question is answered or may not be so much important. I think it is more on biases, which is more important. But I think just since I got the opportunity, when we say the sexual orientation, third category, so that is the only one by birth. As in a sexual organ, there may be an issue. Otherwise, the remaining thing is more often how the person thinks about themselves. Is that right?
Sexual orientation is when you decide whether you're heterosexual, homosexual, or you are bisexual. So it's choosing the kind of sex that you want.
Yeah.
So it's basically selecting the kind of sex that you want. That's the orientation. You're attracted to and you're oriented towards the same sex, the opposite sex, or both. Those are called bisexual. You can put the chart again if you like. It's very clear on the chart.
Yeah. So I think by intersex is the only thing which by birth there is an organ problem. Otherwise, remaining are the ones how we have the attractions or the my what is that, my choice of how do I want to be identified.
Absolutely correct, Ananda. Intersex is when a part of your anatomy is not 100% male or female.
Okay, yeah, that's my question.
Correct.
Anyway, thanks, Karen, for saying those institutionalized biases, how they are built into us. It's a nice secret. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jayendra. We also had Dolly and Catherine. Dolly, would you mind going next? Let's take it from Catherine now.
So that time, I just wanted to confirm that when we say she's a tomboy, so we are talking about expression in that case.
Yes, absolutely. Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Kiran.
They have a many set of terms for men also. They call them demi-girl, demi-boy, they call them pansy, they call them, if they're feminine characteristics, people are very cruel and it starts at school. But lesbian women who identify as a male, they tend to have a lot of characteristics and behavior which is male. So I've dealt with a lot of lesbians who tie their breasts because they're so ashamed they have breasts. They cut their hair short, they wear men's clothes. That's the only way they feel comfortable. That's their identity. But their anatomy is women. Right.
Thank you, Kiran. Catherine, you had a question. Would you like to take that? And in the meanwhile, while Catherine is unmuting, if we can have the video.
Catherine has shared her questions in the chat.
Okay.
So her first question is, what are the studies done on gender and sexuality in South Asia?
Okay. So I don't think I can answer that offhand, but I can send you links. I can just show you that South Asia has done a lot of work. In Bangladesh, in Nepal, in India, many studies have been done on different aspects. A lot has been done on transgender. A lot has been done on the gay and lesbian movement. The Pride Parade, which is this month, is very active in India. There are organizations that fully support. There are NGOs. In Nepal, you can look up, there's an NGO called Blue Diamond Society, which is especially looking at gay and lesbian men, but they've now included transgender and others. then what these NGOs do, they take up first the research to give the data, then they fight for political and legal reform, and then they set up support mechanisms for those who belong to this category and have no help. So there's some excellent NGOs in South Asia. As I said, Nepal, India, Bangladesh in particular have very good programs.
Great. Maybe you can share the link with us, and if we can get Catherine's contacts, we can share that as well. There was one more question from her, which is, what is demisexual?
So demisexual is what I mentioned earlier, is people who have mannerisms and behavior patterns which are of the opposite sex. And so they're called demi boys, demi girls.
Mm.
So it's more to do with mannerisms than a biological difference. But it could be that they're attracted to the same sex or the other sex, but it's more to do with their expression. It's to do with their expression of how they express themselves.
I hope that answers your question, Catherine. So before we take any more questions, there's one more. Can we do a quick group picture with our videos on just for a second? If everybody can just quickly switch on their videos. And we'll also be sharing the feedback form shortly. Please do fill that up. It really helps us know what it is that you'd like. So here we go. Dolly, I hope we're ready to take the picture. Dolly, you're on mute. I hope that's.
I've just clicked. I'll just take a couple of more, or maybe if you can just take a screenshot. 1 second.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. There was one more question on what is the plus. I think, Lakshmi, you asked that question, and I believe you mean LGBTQIA plus. I think that's what you mean. Kiran, what is the plus?
So the plus is including all the new terms that are emerging. And even I can't keep track. There are a lot of new terminology because there's so many permutation combinations of people's sexuality, their expression. And what this group wants is that it should be open. It should not be limited. Before it was always just lesbian and gay. Then it grew to include transgender. Then they use the word queer, the Q, which is again an umbrella term to include all the variations. So it's a growing process. People are discovering they have so many options of the kind of sex they want, of the way they want to dress, of the way they want to express themselves, of their identity. So my understanding is the plus is to be inclusive. And if in a particular country or society, they have a particular term they use, they can add it. So the plus is to recognize that different words, different terms may be used in different parts of the world, but the LGBTQI has come together as a banner by the Pride Month at the national level. So their goal is to be as inclusive as possible. And I think in a few months, if you look for the definition of the plus, you'll find new terminology.
Yeah, the alphabet soup that you were referring to earlier.
It's hard
And funnily enough, it's our goal as well to be inclusive. So that's why we had this session. And we are at 12. Shakuntala, I do see your hand up. I'd like to close the session, and then if Kiran is available for a minute or two, maybe she can take the question. But Kiran, thank you. I cannot thank you enough for not just sharing, the basics and really helping us see the other side, but also for being tolerant of our ignorance. I think that is also, it helps us be more open and more inclusive as well. And I would also like to thank everyone who came, because the fact that you're here shows that you're open to this, and that it's an important journey for us towards understanding and acceptance. And thank you for being with us on this journey.
I would like to say a huge thank you to all of you. First of all, I'm very happy that Pokal chose this subject. And I hope more and more this topic will be discussed so people have a chance to educate themselves and update themselves, and to start the inner reflection journey of how they can contribute constructively to the social inclusive transformation that we need very much in India we need very much in where we work and our families. So thank you so much for listening to me. It was a pleasure to be here and to meet all of you. And if you need anything else, please feel free to get in touch. Thank you, especially to Anu and Dolly. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiran. And if you do have a minute or two, really up to you to take one or two more questions that are coming up.
Yeah, sure, I'm right here.
Great. So if anybody has to leave, I know we said 11 to 12, so you're welcome to. We are here just for the last one question. Yes,
So
Shakuntala.
here, I just want to request that I've put a feedback link in the chat. So please take a minute. It's very important for us to know, right, your feedback or suggestions. Please do fill that. And I'm also getting a lot of messages for you, Kiran. That is a awesome session, and yeah, you have really helped, open, our thought process. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Anu, please.
Go ahead, Shakuntala. Over to you.
Yeah, I personally, this is my personal feeling. It's more than biased. The social behavior with the hijras, like when we meet them in the signal or this thing, the fear, I personally feel a lot of fear with them. So is it because of ignorance or the way they behave? Like how
It's such a good point you raised. Thank you so much for raising that, Shakuntala. Part of it is what you've been oriented socially and the image that has been projected of hijras. That's one reason where we have been warned that these are bad people, they're dangerous, they're aggressive. So that's just a bias that we've been taught. The second is for survival, many hijras have learned to live up to that image. When you meet them in a group, they're lovely people. But when they're on the street, they have to protect themselves. So they are often aggressive. And I saw recently in Bangalore at a red light at a cross section, an auto guy was very rude to this hijra who was selling something. He said horrible things to her. And she turned around and said, "How dare you talk to me like that?" And he tried to hit her and she hit him back. So the point is, they're in a very defensive survival mode because of the attitude people have towards them. So I often put my window down, I ask them, "How are you?" And very recently I was outside a temple, they wait there for money. And I talked to them for about 10 minutes, said, "What's your name? Where are you from?" And they got tears in their eyes and they said, "Can we take a picture with you? Because nobody talks to us like this. Nobody's ever asked us our name or where we are from. Nobody." So if you reach out in a positive way, I'm very confident you'll get a positive response. They don't get respect, so they have to protect themselves and be defensive. And that behavior makes us scared. Try and talk to them differently next time and see if you get a different reaction. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Great. So I think that would be it. We don't want to take any more of your time, although I am getting a lot of messages about how wonderful the session was and how inspiring you have been. And I second that completely. It's been great interacting with you and such a learning experience, Kiran. Thank you so much for your time and energy.
I'd like to thank all of you again. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Kiran. One last thing that somebody asked, that what could be the best way to connect with you if somebody wants to connect? Should they reach out to you on social media?
You can write to my email. You can give them my email. I think that's the best.
Okay, we'll do that.
Yeah, they're free to
Thank
write
you.
to me because it will be safer, because I may not see the messages and I may not know who it is on WhatsApp. So email is safer.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. If I can provide more information, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you,
all
everyone.
for attending as well. Thank you so much. Have a good
Thank
day.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.